Hi, everybody. Joining us via Zoom and via Facebook. This is the YES Alumni Grants Proposal Writing Webinar. So if that's what you were hoping for, you are in the right place. If you were trying to sign up for something else or log into some other webinar, just stay at this one. There's going to be some tips for everybody here. So if you are on the Zoom application, please change your chat function to all panelists and attendees. As I give this presentation, my colleagues from iEarn and from American Council's Jenny and Emma are going to be checking in on those comments, and they're going to let me know when there's something to respond to. But otherwise, I'm just going to kick it right off here with our PowerPoint. So let me switch to that. As I load up the PowerPoint, I'll let you know a little bit about me. My name is Rachel Markowtiz. I am the YES Program Manager at AMIDEAST in Washington, D.C. I've been working with the YES program for about 3.5 years now. And one of the great things I've gotten to do is to help YES alumni learn a little bit about writing skills to help them with grants proposals. So that's what we're going to do here today, is we're going to spend the next hour going over some writing skills that you can use specifically for YES Alumni Grants applications. At any time, if you have a question or a comment, please use the chat function either on Facebook or on Zoom to let us know what you're thinking, to chat with each other, and we will try to respond to those as we go along. This webinar is also going to be recorded. So if you missed something or if you have to leave early, we will put a link to this up on our YES program social media, and you'll be able to refer back to it later or share it with your friends if there's something interesting that you've learned that you'd like to share. So let's just go ahead and launch right in. Our agenda for the next hour, I'm going to do this quick little introduction that I've already started. Then we're going to spend a little time talking about writing rules. I put those in quotation marks, and I'll explain a little bit later what I mean by those quotation marks for writing rules. Then we're going to discuss general project proposal writing, how to write proposals for projects in general, some writing tips. And then finally, we're going to go over specifically the YES Alumni Grants application and talk about some tips for how you can write your application with really good professional writing skills. So to start off with, we do have our first poll. Emma, if you wouldn't mind putting that up. A couple times throughout the webinar, there is going to be a poll. A question is going to pop up on your screen that you can answer. The first question here is, what brings you to the webinar today? Are you here because you are definitely going to apply for a YES Alumni Grant? Are you here because you're thinking about applying and wanted to hear a little bit more about it? Maybe you just actually want to learn about proposal writing. You're not that into YES Alumni Grants. Maybe you're a YES staff or supporter who's just looking to support YES alumni in the grants process. A bunch of you have started responding. Thank you. Please continue to respond to that question. I'll give it a couple more seconds while I give you a little bit more intro on myself. So I am really into professional writing. I have never written a novel. I've kind of dabbled with poetry, but really the type of writing that's most interesting to me is professional writing, how to write in efficient ways that we can communicate concrete ideas about our work to one another, whether that be through email or through social media posts, and in this case, through applications that we're using our writing to convey to someone else the idea, a really good idea behind something we want to do. So that's why I'm here today. I am a published writer myself. I have written some research that has been published, and I do a lot of social media posting, but I'm very excited to talk to you today about grants. So we finished our first poll here, and I see that 22% of you are definitely applying for a YES Alumni Grant, and another 33% of you are thinking about it. So over 50% of you are here because you are interested in the YES Alumni Grants process. Another 22% of you are just generally interested in learning about proposal writing. You're not sure yet about YES Alumni Grants. That is a good reason to be here too. Most of these tips will be applicable to any type of proposal writing that you might do. All right, so first poll finished. Let's go ahead and jump right into our writing rules. Let me see if I can. Here we go. Writing rules. Why is the word rules in quotation marks? The word rules is in quotation marks because what I have discovered throughout my career with writing is that there are writing preferences, but not really necessarily specific rules. Besides actual grammar, I'm not here to tell you there is an exact way that you have to write your proposals. There's an exact kind of language you must use. In every situation, you can tailor your writing to the audience that you're writing to your own personal voice and style, or maybe it's some new technique that you're thinking, I'm going to try something different than what's normally been done on this process before. That's all fine. There aren't any exact rules. But it is important to think about the different kinds of writing that we're doing and what tone is used in those. There are different writing styles between a report that you might be writing for school academically, for a proposal where you're trying to get funding for something, a report after you've already gotten funding, or social media writing. Sometimes it's more casual, sometimes it's more formal. Sometimes you're being very engaging and trying to use your writing to elicit responses from people. Sometimes you're trying to convey, to convince someone of an argument that you have for yourself. So you're going to use different kinds of writing in different parts of your life, professionally and personally. We're here to talk about proposal writing specifically for YES Alumni Grants, but these rules that I'm about to tell you really apply to any kind of writing that you might do. And again, these are my opinion. This is not written in a book somewhere that an English teacher is going to tell you. These are the exact rules. But here are some tips, essentially, that I think you could follow. First of all, know your audience. Before you write something, you need to think about who you are writing it for. Who is going to consume your writing, all right? And then write for that person. Think about them as you're writing. Be consistent. If you applied a certain rule earlier, let's say you capitalized a certain title of a project, keep doing that throughout so that even if you were wrong grammatically, just be consistent with it. There's certain rules that people like to use in certain industries that others don't. For example, US. Do we write capital U, capital S? Or do we write capital U, period, capital S, period? Or maybe you like to write USA, and again, with the periods or without the periods. That's really your choice. Just be consistent. Throughout your writing, decide how you're going to do it and keep it the same. Keep your tone the same. Remember your audience with your consistency. Use active voice and be precise, all right? Sometimes I read writing that has become very flowery and used lots of roundabout words. That's great for poetry. For professional writing, we want you to say exactly what you mean. I'll give you a couple examples of this in a minute. And then finally, avoid language that is exclusive. Be simple. Make your language inclusive that anyone who's reading this might be able to understand it. And if you're going to use an acronym, you should explain it. If you have a project called Big Sisters Forever, BSF, the first time that you write BSF, you need to write Big Sisters Forever and then explain in parentheses BSF. Don't just throw that in there everywhere. Or maybe you're getting support from a local organization called Friends. Well, the first time you write that, you're going to need to explain who is Friends, why am I listening to them? Don't just assume that your audience knows who that is. And in professional writing, this is a big problem because all of us sometimes have the sense that everyone else knows more than me and I'm the outsider who's coming in. And so we start using really insider language jargon, we say, like words that are specific to that industry or acronyms that we think will make us sound really smart and like we know what we're doing. It would be better to treat it as if your audience also does not know what you're talking about and explain things from the beginning. So let me explain a little bit more what I mean about passive versus active voice, being precise in your language. On the screen, you can see 3 examples of passive voice, and this is used so frequently in professional writing, it drives me crazy. For example, all the cookies were eaten by Rachel during the break. What that sentence do is that it makes the subject the cookies and it makes the verb were. That's not a very active, engaging sentence. A better way to say this would be, Rachel ate all the cookies during the break. Rachel is the subject, ate is the verb, and we can really feel that in the sentence. Instead of all of the cookies were eaten, Rachel ate the cookies. That's what we're really trying to say. So that's a very basic example. Here's another example. The team will be following up soon. A more direct way to say this would be, the team will follow up soon. All we did is take be out of that. The team will be following. Anytime you have a verb with ing at the end in your writing, look at it a second time and think, is that the most direct way that I could be saying this? The team will follow up. Now I can see the action. It's not that they will be following up. They will follow up. Follow up is the thing we want to focus on in this sentence. And then finally, one more example. Fatima was able to identify a replacement. Fatima identified a replacement. We don't need to know that she was able. And I know that that's how we often speak, but in your professional writing, try to simplify it. Try to say it more directly. Fatima identified a replacement. It conveys the exact same thing in a more clear, more precise way. So those are some just little examples of passive versus active voice for you to think about. While we're still talking about writing rules, I wanted to give you a few examples of common YES alumni writing errors. So when I'm reading proposals or website stories from YES alumni, these are many times the things that I see that could be improved. First of all, capitalization. Here's an example. When I got home from the USA, I was so happy to be a YES alumni and study sciences in school. Feel free to use the chat box if you want to talk about where the mistakes in this sentence are. But since we're not live in person, I'll just point out, I should be capitalized both times that it's used. USA should be capitalized. The whole word yes should be capitalized. YES are all capitalized because it's an acronym for a program, Youth Exchange and Study. YES alumni, the yes should all be capitalized, the alumni should not. Because it is not a formal word there, alumni. So if that doesn't make sense to you, that's fine, but just memorize this, that when you say, I am a YES alumnus or YES alumna, yes is all capitalized, alumna is not. And then finally here, sciences should not be capitalized in this sentence. I know that happens in many of your native languages, that the word for a subject would be capitalized. In English, it would not be. So just think about those capitalization errors. Run-on sentences. YES alumni love to write run-on sentences. You get so excited that you just write like 100 sentences in one sentence. For example, exactly 1 year ago, I got back from the YES program and was looking through all my souvenirs from the US and all the social media posts from my friends who just returned home. And all I could think was, I hope I can make a difference in my home community because that is what the YES program is all about in the end. And I really want to show everyone how much I learned and how much I care about cultural exchange programs like YES. Believe it or not, you all often send us sentences that are just as long as that, sometimes even longer. And we are very excited to hear your excitement, but it does make it very difficult to understand what you're trying to say. So try to avoid run-on sentences, make your sentences short and clear. Vague and incomplete sentences. This is very common as well. We can't read your mind. So when you say things like, we're planning to do a project that will help kids from the neighborhood, I need to know who we are. I don't know what do a project means. To how are you helping the kids, what neighborhood, etc. So try to make your sentences a little bit more clear and less vague. And then try not to assume that the audience knows something. This goes back to one of those writing rules about acronyms. The JACC will handle the 3D retro planning of the ProjCap. We get sentences like this all the time. I, as the reviewer, I don't know what the JACC is. I don't know what a 3D retro planning is. You've made this word ProjCap. Maybe that's something you use in your community. Maybe it's not something I use in mine. So just try when you're writing to make sure that you are not making those assumptions. Okay, moving on from those common writing errors. This is my favorite one. Do you know the difference between a YES alumna, a YES alumnus, YES alumni, and YES alumnae? Do you know this one? This one is even used incorrectly often by my peers in international education. So I wanted to make sure that you all have this really clear in your heads. A YES alumna is one female alum of the YES program. YES alumna. A YES alumnus is one male alum of the YES program. YES alumni is a group of many, 2 or more YES alumni. They can be male or female or mixed. If they are only female, then they are YES alumnae with an AE at the end. These might seem like really silly rules, but it does help make your writing look more professional, more precise, if you can learn how to use those 4 words correctly. If you'd like, you can come back to this screen right here, print it, and write next to it anything you need to help make you remember which one is which. I have some colleagues who have done that right next to their desks, so that anytime you're like, okay, which one is it, you can look over and remember. Otherwise, a new shortcut that we've started using in the industry is just to say alum. You can do that as well if you're not sure, but I really think with 2 minutes of your time, you could learn these rules and it will really improve your writing. Alumna, alumna, alumnus, alumni, alumni. All right. So those were the basic writing rules that I wanted to go over with you all. Now we are going to talk specifically about proposal writing. And this next little section is a little bit less about writing and grammar and more about what goes into a proposal and how can you think through the various aspects of it to make sure that your questions address those answers. Emma and Jenny, are there any questions that I should respond to before we move on?
No questions, just lots of positive feedback. We have people on Facebook saying they're interested in applying, saying it's so helpful, saying that they just learned a lot about the passive voice. So all positive feedback.
Great. And I know everybody that this is like a really quick run by of all of this stuff. We only have 1 hour, so this is mostly just to get you a sense of what the things are that you could be working on your own. Looking them up on Google, looking back at other YES alumni webinars that talk about this more in depth, checking with other YES alumni who have done more professional writing. This should give you a good sense of where to get started to improve your writing. Ahmed, I did see you raising your hand several times. If you have something you'd like to contribute, please feel free to put it in the chat box, and Jenny and Emma will let me know throughout. I think you're raising your hand again right now, so please feel free to put any comments in the chat box. That goes for anybody who's watching this webinar right now. All right, moving on to general proposal writing rules. Proposal writing, what are we even talking about when we say proposal writing? We're talking about writing something where you are trying to influence someone else to either fund your project or support your project or even just to inform them about what your project's going to be. I also really like to write a full proposal for a project that I'm doing that I don't even need anybody else's help with, but I'm just writing it for myself to convey all the different elements of this project. What am I trying to accomplish, etc. So many of you have probably written proposals before. And Emma, would you mind going ahead and putting up the second poll here? We're just going to talk for a second about what kind of proposals you may have written in the past. Have you ever written a grant application before? Since in this webinar, we are talking specifically about the grant application process. Please let us know while I'm talking, just use that poll to let us know whether you have written a YES Alumni Grant application in the past, or maybe other kinds of grants application, or maybe you've never written one at all. But even if you've never written specifically a grant application, you may have written other kinds of proposals before. Maybe you've written a proposal for a local YES alumni activity. You've written out your plan and gotten funding or support locally from your YES alumni staff. Maybe you've even applied for some big things before, like the State Department alumni grants, the Alumni Engagement Innovation Fund grant that you're all eligible to apply for. Or maybe you've written some proposals for outside activities or grants or professional proposals in your career. So think about those, just get that in your mind right now. What kinds of proposals have I maybe written already so that you can reflect on that process as we talk about this. All right, we have the result of our poll. Have you ever written a grant application before? 40% of you have actually written a YES Alumni Grant before, and 50% of you have written other kinds of grants as well. So a huge portion of you, everybody, 80% of you total have written some kind of a grant application, and 20% of you are brand new. Well, good news for you. It's not as hard as it sounds. So if you're brand new to this process, welcome. And for those of you who have done it before, there's always ways we can improve. So let's get going. Proposal writing 101. Proposals are how you get from an idea you had in your mind to reality. All right. I think this is a great idea. How am I going to make it actually physically happen in the world around me? It starts with a good proposal. What's in the right kind of project proposal? What are the right things to include? I'm using quotation marks again, just like I did earlier for rules, because there is no right answer to this in general. If you have a specific prompt, if you have, for example, the YES Alumni Grants application asks you for specific things, then yes, there's a yes or no answer to this. But if you are just writing a proposal from scratch for yourself, there is no answer for exactly what must be included in it. That being said, I have some tips for things that you maybe should think about to help you make sure that you get your ideas to reality. It's a very dynamic process. It varies greatly from one project to the other, but we're going to talk about some of the best practices that you could be using. What goes into a proposal? Who, what, where, when, why, and how. That's it. You need to answer these questions in your proposal to get from your idea to reality. You should first and foremost think, what is the problem that you are trying to solve? Where did you learn about that problem? Who defined that problem? Let's say that you have an idea. I actually just read about this idea recently from Hiba from Morocco. She started a library at a local school, and she explained the problem she noticed was that one of the local schools did not have a library. It didn't have books available to the students. She explained very clearly why this is a problem. Children need books to learn. They come to school to get a sense of wonder and for learning. Books help students become independent learners. All kinds of statistics you could name about why reading helps us become better members of our community, etc. So you define that problem really clearly. The problem is there aren't any books at this school. Now, how does your project solve or improve on that problem? Are you planning to just get some books and put them there and forget about it forever? That could be one way that you're helping to solve or improve on the problem. Or maybe what you're trying to do is get the school invested and get them to purchase books. Or maybe you're trying to create a sisterhood between that school and another school where they're going to share books. You could decide how you're going to solve that problem yourself. I use the word improve here as well because your project doesn't have to say, I'm going to fix this forever, right? But you do need to clearly say, here's the big problem, and here's how I'm going to make some kind of improvement to that problem. And then finally, how are you going to know whether your project was successful? Is it because every student in your entire country now has books available to them? That's a pretty lofty goal. Or is it just good enough that for this particular project, you'll know it was successful if you successfully got this number of books for this one school, or that you noticed this many more students have started reading, or that the school has identified library as an important factor for their students. You decide. How are you going to know whether your idea solved that problem? And now physically what's actually in a proposal. So that previous slide, this is what I think you should start thinking about before you start writing. Now your project proposal is going to very clearly state the vision and the elements of the project to help you, again, take it from idea to reality. Your proposal should very clearly state all those ideas that you have running around in your head. And as you have new ideas, you come back to that written document and you update it and you make it better and you make it more clear. You should answer in your project proposal what tools you're planning to use and why. If you're doing a camp for kids with disabilities, what kinds of games are you going to play? Or maybe you want to do animal therapy and have horses available for them to ride. Or maybe you're going to do independent projects where they do solo artwork or something. Whatever you choose to use, why are you choosing to use it? And very clearly state what is that tool. What community are you going to work in for that same project, a camp for children with disabilities? Which children from which communities with which disabilities? How many of them do you think you can really bring? How many volunteers would you need to run that? Do you need specific types of volunteers with specific types of training? Really think about who the communities are, which people are going to actually physically take place in your project. Then also think, is there local buy-in? And what I mean by buy-in is, does the community who you're trying to help want the help that you're giving them, right? So if Hiba from Morocco built her library somewhere where the kids really didn't want books, or they didn't want the kind of books that she got them, maybe she brought them all novels and fantasy reading, and what they really wanted was some books about geography and history. So think about it beforehand. What do the people that you're trying to help really want? Do they want it? If they want something different than what you are proposing, maybe think about changing your proposal. I like to do sports projects, and I play Ultimate Frisbee. I love Ultimate Frisbee. I think it's a great tool for community building and youth empowerment and women's empowerment and all kinds of things. It's not always the right tool to use in every community. Sometimes the communities I go to say, that's cool, Rachel, but like, we don't want to play Ultimate Frisbee. We really want to play football. And maybe that's the right tool to use in that case. And I have to swallow my pride and say, well, I don't like football as much, but that's what they want to do, so let's do football. Or maybe I say, I don't have any expertise in football, so I need to find a community that wants to do Ultimate Frisbee. So really think about local buy-in. You also need to think about whether there are risks. We're going to talk about that in more detail later, but it should definitely be addressed in your proposal. And then finally, who are your partners? Who are the people that you need to actually make this project happen? Those questions should all be answered somewhere in your project proposal. Even though there's no rules about exactly where that belongs, it should be answered somewhere in your proposal. So these are the actual physical things that I think should be in every proposal. And your YES Alumni Grants proposal doesn't state it exactly like this. This is more a way for you to start organizing your ideas before you get to that actual template for YES Alumni Grants and start answering their essay questions. The first thing you need to have are goals, objectives, and deliverables, all right? So there's a whole list of stuff here, but first we're going to talk about goals, objectives, and deliverables. This means having specifically written down specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound goals, all right? You need to say exactly what you're trying to do. I would like to build a library at this school in a space they already have. We're trying to get at least 200 books of these different varieties. And you already have a plan for where you're going to get those books, that you know how you can get it. It's achievable. It's realistic. The school is interested in this, so I know that I can do it. And it's time bound. I think I can get 200 books in 3 months, for example. So that's how you make your goals and objectives. So for example, for this one, we want to provide at least 10 YES alumni with online training that will improve their professional writing on the YES Alumni Grants applications, resulting in clear submissions in spring 2019. This is just a really draft example of what my goal or objective and deliverables for this webinar could be. The next element would be an implementation timeline. And that one I don't have a separate slide on because I think it's pretty clear. You need to have a timeline. You need to write out what you expect to achieve by when. There's 2 ways you can do this. You can start by right now and see what are the steps you need to take and how long it might take you to get to the end result. Or you could start at the end. Let's say your project needs to be completed by August 2019, and then work backwards and see what the steps would be until then. But make yourself a very clear timeline. The next thing that I promised you we would talk about is risk assessment. What are the risks of your project? And you may be thinking to yourself right now, Rachel, there aren't any risks. It's going to be fine. Not true. Every project has a risk. Every single project that any of us ever does has certain things that must happen for the project to succeed. Today, when I came in here to do this webinar, if my computer was not working, this would be a problem. It would be difficult for me to run this without a computer. So what's my contingency plan? Is there another computer that I could borrow? Can I get to work a little bit early to make sure my computer is working properly and then get a new one if it's not working properly? Who are the people I can call on at what time of the day to make it happen? What are the risks of your project, all right? And what's your backup plan for that? Another good thing to consider is it possible that your project could do more harm than good? This is a very difficult question that I think we like to ignore, especially when it comes to human development projects, but it is an important question. Is it possible that by raising people's hopes about a certain thing, you actually make their lives more miserable when it doesn't come true later. Think about those kinds of risks and how you're impacting people in your community. That doesn't mean don't keep trying. It just means it's an important part of your proposal writing process to think about those things. After you have thought about your risks really seriously and listed all of them out, revise your proposal. Go back to that original thinking. What's the problem? How am I going to solve it? What are the tools? What's my timeline? Revise it if you need to. Maybe make it more achievable if you could put it into a longer time frame, or have a smaller, more reasonable goal at the end. But after you've done that risk assessment, go back and see how you can fix it. Maybe your activity is an outdoor activity. What are the risks that the time that you've planned this, it's going to rain or thunder or snow or be too hot to be outside? How can you solve that? Can you get shade tents? Could you have water available? Think about all those things. Maybe your activities should be more low key or should be more high energy in order to adjust for the type of weather that you expect. We're going to take a quick little pause here. Emma and Jenny, any comments or questions from the chats that we should address right now?
Nope, not that I've seen.
Great, I love it. That means that I am communicating so clearly and you are all so good at writing already that this is making perfect sense. I believe that that's the case. But do feel free, everyone, to use that chat feature to comment or make questions if you have any. Otherwise, I'm going to keep cruising along. So we've talked about risks, talked about goals, timeline, risk assessment. The next element is your communication plan. Your proposal should include something that really clearly outlines how you are going to communicate the launch of your project, how you're going to distribute information about your project, how you're going to engage the people that you're trying to help with your project, a social media plan, and a timeline for all of that. Make that clear from the beginning. Don't make your whole proposal with a really great idea and then later go, oh yeah, how are we going to communicate this? Think about it in advance and put it in your proposal. Include it in your timeline. That's good for other people to know, but it's also good to remind you. You can put it in your calendar. These are the days I'm supposed to communicate these things to these people. Next thing is partners and stakeholders. Again, I don't have a separate slide for this topic because I think it's pretty clear. You should, on a separate sheet, really draft who are all of the different people and organizations that you might need to assist with your project. Who are the people who are going to benefit? Who are the volunteers going to be? Even make a little chart of all of that for yourself. Some of the people might be both at the same time. It could be that the school that you're building a library for is your partner because you need their permission and their help. But they're also a beneficiary because the school benefits from the books that you bring to them. But just think about that, draft that list for yourself, and then include that thinking when you write your essays in your YES Alumni Grant proposal. And then finally, a monitoring and evaluation plan, or not finally, second to last, monitoring and evaluation plan. We will go into that in a little bit more detail. What is monitoring and evaluation, M&E? Feel free to type about it with each other in the chat box while I talk. Monitoring and evaluation means, way back in the beginning of this webinar when we talked about how are you going to know that your project succeeded. Monitoring and evaluation is how you're going to know. You need to have some way to measure whether you made an improvement to that problem that you were thinking about. It's important to do it both to know that you didn't do more harm than good, to see how much good you did, to improve your methodologies for the future. So maybe the next project could be even better and make a bigger impact. And you also will probably need to do monitoring and evaluation to report back to whoever funded your project. If you got funding from us for a YES Alumni Grant, or if you got funding from some other organization or the State Department, they're going to want to see evidence that what you did made an impact and how big of an impact. So you need to be thinking about that and getting ready to write about it in your proposal. All right, it's going to help you improve your performance. The final element of a proposal is a reporting plan. So you've done all this great thinking and outlining, and now you've made you're about to make it an actual reality. think about also how you plan to report on that, whether it's just a report to yourself, whether it's all through social media, or whether you're going to actually write a final report that you provide to your funders to show what you did on your project. All right, report and plan. We like to avoid this because sometimes it's not fun after all the great work that you've done to have to sit down and synthesize it. But I promise you, you will be glad that you did, because then you'll be able to use that to improve your projects in the future or to help other people do better projects. The most important aspects of your reporting are to show the outputs. So what was the result? What were the milestones? What were the big moments in your project that big things happened? Is there an upcoming schedule of next steps? What were the risks? Did you have any setbacks? And just think about doing that regularly, not just at the end of your project. You could also do like a midterm report. And then it makes your final report easier because you've already got a lot of it documented. All right. Do you have any questions about proposal writing? Now is your chance. Jenny and Emma, anything in the chat box right now?
Not at the moment.
Cool. If anybody has something to add, you go for it. Otherwise, maybe just even be thinking about questions. If you don't have something that you'd like to ask in the chat box, you are welcome to let us know afterwards, and we will do our best to respond to you. So again, what we have covered so far are some basic writing rules. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, we just have a question about budget. Are we going to cover anything about the budget?
So the budget I did not include in that list because I wanted to focus more on things that require more narrative type writing. But yes, budgets are an important part of project management. So yes, you will need a budget. I'm not covering it in this webinar. That's a really good question. In your YES Alumni Grants application, you will have a section on budget, but it's not a section that requires really intensive like essay writing. So we're not going to go into that. That would really be more for a webinar, a webinar on project management, which is not what this one is, although I know we covered some of the same topics that would be in a project management training. So good question. For this, at this point, what you need to know is, yes, you should have a budget. It should be very clear. You should communicate it very clearly in both words and numbers. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes, we have another question on Facebook. Can you apply for a YES grant while you are still implementing a previous grant?
That's a good question that I don't know the answer to because I don't actually administer the YES grants. I'm just here to help you improve your writing. Jenny, do you know the answer to that?
Yes, you can absolutely apply for a YES grant if you're implementing another grant. You just can't apply. You can't carry out two projects in the same year. So if you're carrying out a project from the 2018 grant cycle, you can still apply for a 2019 grant.
There you go. Great answer. All right. Let's see. We have about 20 minutes left to talk specifically about YES Alumni Grants. We do have time for more questions if anyone types them in. Just as a little review, what we've covered so far is basic writing tips, the rules for all of the writing that you may do in your professional and personal life. Then we've talked about generally proposal writing. What's the process? What are the elements and how are they communicated in a proposal? And next we're going to spend the remainder of the webinar talking specifically about the elements of the YES Alumni Grant, the written elements, the essays that you're going to have to answer. So if you have more questions, feel free to pop them in there. Otherwise, we're going to move right on to the YES Alumni Grants application writing question. There are 6 sections of the YES Alumni Grant application that require little mini essays. All right, you'll need a project summary, a needs statement, project description, project impact, a project evaluation plan, and then your sustainability and visibility response. All right, so each of those require you to write a little mini essay. So that's where all these writing skills we just discussed should come in handy. Most of the rest of the application is like a question with your response. All right, But these are the heavy writing parts. Emma, could you go ahead and do the next poll, please? Now I have a real question for y'all that is not about you, but it's about your understanding of proposal writing. Which of these 4 sections do you think you should write last? What's the last thing, after you've done all of your thinking and you've sketched out all this stuff and you're ready to write your alumni grant proposal, which section should be the last thing that you write after all of your thinking? The project impact, the needs statement, the project summary, or maybe your evaluation plan? I'm going to give you all a little bit longer to answer. We've got 5 votes in. Feel free to guess. We're not going to hold it against you. I would have definitely been wrong about this the first time that I learned about writing. So no judgment. This gives you a chance. I'm glad to see, so far, I'll give you a hint. I'm glad to see that none of you have voted for needs statement yet, because you're right. That should come pretty early on, that you're thinking about what are the needs of the community. So that's not the last thing. What would it be? Project impact, project summary, or evaluation plan? So far, about a little over half of you think it should be your evaluation plan. Then another 20% for impact, another 20% for summary.
All right, I'm going to close the poll in 5 seconds.
Yeah, your last chance to vote, y'all. All right, we have the results. 60% of you said evaluation plan. And I can see what you're thinking, because the evaluation plan is essentially one of the last things that you're doing, is that you're evaluating how the project went. Very good thinking. This was kind of a question, because the real answer, in my opinion, is the project summary. Now, why would the project summary be the last thing that you write? It's the first thing listed. It's the first written section of the YES Alumni Grants application. You'd think that it should be one of the first things that you write. But in reality, that summary is you looking at all the other things that you've already written and making a really quick little abstract of it. A few, like a couple paragraphs summarizing the whole thing that you fully described in all those 5 other sections. So in my opinion, you should do the other 5 sections first in that order, and then come back to your project summary. So let's look at what's actually in each of the sections. The project summary, and you'll see on the next slides, all the photographs are from various YES Alumni Grants projects over the last couple of years. So I hope you'll enjoy those photos. So here's the prompt on the YES Alumni Grants application for project summary. This one is no more than 200 words. You need a very concise description of the program or project you're planning to do. It should say who you are, what you're concerned about, what you propose, how you propose to do it, the start and finish time, the activities, the costs, essentially everything that's in all of your other pieces that you're going to detail in way more detail. The summary is just giving, if I was to read only that part, I would have a good idea about what your project is going to be. All right, that is a 200 words only. It's not a lot of space. So you really need to have clear, concise language to make sure that I, the reader, when I read that, I think this person really has a great idea and they know how they're going to make it happen. The next thing, which I think is actually the first thing you should write, is called a needs statement. Why are you interested in doing this project? What encouraged you? Is there a need for this? Is there some reason the community you're trying to help really needs this project? Use evidence if you can. Have statistics. You could have quotes. You could say you saw it with your own eyes and you asked more people and you learned these things, and then you started researching it and you found these publications about how this is a big problem. So for example, for Hiba's library, she could be talking about how she saw the problem at the school and she knew all these things from the past. So then she researched it and she saw that books are a really important part of learning. Students in schools that don't have a library have lower outcomes. They don't go on to school, or they have a harder time learning, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So that's your need statement. I would start with that one. Why do you want to do this project? What's the need? The next thing is your project description. Again, you have 400 words for this one. So the need statement was 400 words. The project description is also 400 words. Now is where you say, okay, we talked about what the problem is. What am I planning to do? How do I plan to do it? When and where is it going to take place? So that's the who, what, where, when, why, and how. All right, that's your project description, 400 words. Then you have your project impact, another 400 words. The YES Alumni Grants application asks you to explain. It's sort of tying the first two questions together, the needs and the description. How is your project specifically going to help develop that community in some way? Or how is it going to contribute to your professional and personal development? So when you're looking at what the needs were and why you're trying to do this, the project impact says, what's the benefit? What are the results that you expect? And how are you going to measure it? But you only have to start touching on how are you going to measure the project's impact in that 400-word essay, because then next you have your evaluation plan. You have another 400 words to explain specifically what kind of data you're going to use to measure your project and whether you're achieving those goals that you laid out previously in the project description and the need statement. How are you going to collect it? Are you going to do a survey beforehand about people's ideas and then afterwards survey those same people and see whether their ideas changed? Can you physically count the number of things that happened? Do you need to check back in with them 6 months later because what you're trying to do is make a long-term change? So your evaluation plan is to check now and then in 3 months and then in a year maybe. Think about that and really articulate that. You have 400 words to write about your project evaluation plan. That's that M&E thing we were talking about before, monitoring and evaluation. And then the last step is that project sustainability and visibility. All right, you have another 400 words here to talk about how do you envision your project or its outcomes to get known publicly. This is the communication plan thing that we talked about before. And then adding into that, do you see your project continuing after your grant finishes? And if so, how is that going to be funded? Maybe it doesn't need more funding. Maybe your project is something where you're trying to get people engaged and you expect them to continue it on their own afterwards. Those are all possibilities, but think about it and write about it clearly in your project sustainability and visibility. And once you've written each of these sections, you come all the way back to your summary and you make a really clear and concise summary. All right. Each section might influence the next. So you might have written your needs statement, and then when you get to your project description, you realize your needs statement was too broad. Your project is really going to describe something smaller and more limited. It's going to fix something more limited, and you can revise your needs statement. Maybe you get to your evaluation plan and you realize, the things that I can actually measure are different than I thought, and you can come back to your impact statement and change it and say, okay, I'm not planning to increase literacy in my entire country. I'm just planning to impact 15 to 30 students in this small community. All right. So each of these sections is going to influence the next. Do not be afraid to go back and fix it. If I were you, before I write any of these sections, I would go through all the steps I talked about before in proposal writing in general with the goals and deliverables and timeline and M&E. And if you've sketched all of that out somewhere in a rough form, it'll be a lot easier for you to answer these questions in writing.
Hey, Rachel.
Yeah.
We have a question from Ray. Ray says, how long do you need to finish or write an effective project proposal? Should it take longer than months if you would consider including statistics or research in the need statement section of writing the proposal?
Great question, Ray. That answer is going to vary depending on you and your availability and your writing skills and how clear you already are on this project. I would hope it does not take you more than months. I think for projects of the size that we're looking at for the YES Alumni Grants application, you can sketch out all those ideas and get really solid in them. And then the actual writing, if you really commit yourself to it, could only take a couple of weeks of your free time if you sit down and really get to it. Maybe you want to include some editing or revising time where you've written it, but then you share it with a friend or with a YES staff person and you've asked for their input on your writing, and then you would need a little bit of extra time. But you shouldn't have to spend as much time as people, for example, who are applying for a PhD program or who are writing something that's going to be published in a journal or in an academic paper. This is a lower commitment than that. At the same time, you should be thoughtful about it. So I'd say that if you already have a great idea, you already have some expertise on that topic, it could take you a couple weeks of your free time to really refine your written sections. Jenny, do you think that's about right with your experience with the grants?
Yeah, I would say that's good advice. And also, too, you just touched on this, but maybe if you could let us know if you have anything else to say. Bahar has asked, who do you think should revise our proposals after we're done?
Yeah. Your first and best resource is going to be other YES alumni. You might not know this, but there are YES alumni all around you who have done these things really successfully. Some of you on this webinar right now have done this very successfully. And maybe you just need one of your peers to like look at it and have some insights that you didn't notice before, or to let you know which parts are unclear. I think that's a great place to start. You may have friends that are other alumni who could do it, or you could ask, if you have an alumni association, you could ask the leadership of that association to help you with that. And I think that they would take that really seriously. And if they don't have the necessary skills, they could find someone who did. You may also have the kind of relationship with your YES staff that if they have the time, they might be willing to help you revise it as well. And of course, you can ask people outside of YES too. If you're working with a partner organization that is counting on you to do this project and to get this funding, maybe ask someone from there. Could you read through this and see if it, if they speak English, you can ask them to read through it and see if it makes sense to them. And if they think that it conveys the project that you had talked to them about and that it's clear. That would be my advice. Start with some YES alumni though. I've got on the screen right now just a reminder of what those 6 written sections are: the summary, the needs statement, et cetera, and how many words they are. You'll notice that all of them are 400 words except for the summary. And again, I think you should start with these bottom 5 first and then come back to that summary and keep revising them in between. I hope none of this is making the application process sound really daunting for you. I think every YES alum is actually fully capable of doing this process. So please don't make it, I hope this doesn't make it sound like it's really hard, and if you write it poorly, we're gonna judge you or think that you're a bad YES alum or something. That's not the case at all. This is very achievable. 400 words is actually not as many words as you might think. Your hardest job is actually probably going to be to narrow it down and make it more, make it shorter and more concise. But you can do this. I promise that you can. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's definitely okay if there are grammatical errors or if you're unclear in certain parts. That's one of the things that Jenny will work with you on. If you are selected, she will work with you on clarifying any parts that maybe aren't totally well developed in your application yet.
Hey, Rachel, we have a question
Yes.
about where can I read about other grant projects that YES alumni have done?
Well, I think actually Jenny would be the right person to answer that question.
Well, so yes, on our website, yesprograms.org, there are multiple stories about grant projects that have been done before. I suggest that you go under stories and you can search for alumni grant, and you can read multiple stories from projects that have been conducted around the world.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea too, as you are preparing your grant proposals, to read about what other alumni have done, what's been successful. If they've done a good job, you should be able to tell from their stories a little bit about the risks that they faced and delays and who their partners were, etc. Or if you read about a project that's maybe similar to something you want to do, you could reach out to your YES staff and see if we could connect you with that alumnus or alumna, and that they could give you specific tips. Maybe they would even share their report with you so that you could get a really clear idea of how to make your project even more impactful. That's a great idea. I'm just going to remind everybody too, this is the final screen of our webinar and we only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to end with a quick reminder of those writing rules. As you write, think about who your audience is and speak to them in your writing. Be consistent in your writing, in the tone and the grammatical rules, etc., that you choose. Be precise, use active voice that is clear and short when possible, and avoid using inside or exclusive language. Make it simple. Make it so that some other person unrelated who reads what you wrote can understand what you're trying to do with your project, how you're going to take these ideas floating around in your head and make them a real thing in your community. Are there any other questions or comments? We do have just a couple minutes left if there's other things for me to respond to. See if I can see the chat as well.
Yeah, Rachel, so Bahar's asking, do alumni that get selected for grants based on their project idea or based on how good they wrote their proposal?
Great question, Bahar. I should have made this clear at the beginning. The reason we're talking about your writing is because your writing is how you tell me what your idea is and how you're going to implement it. We are not picking you based on whether you know how to capitalize or if you use run-on sentences or not. The problem with bad writing is that it makes it difficult for me to know that you have a good idea. So if you have a really good idea, we want you to have these kinds of writing skills so that you can tell us about that idea and make that idea more clear so that we can select your project. So the answer is you are getting selected based on the idea, not on your writing skills. But the writing skills are a necessary way for me to know what your idea is, how you're going to do it, and for me to know that you really thought this through, that you're an expert, that you're ready to do it. All right? So for whoever ends up evaluating, and I keep saying me, as it's not me, there are other evaluators for the grants, right? But the person who's reading your grant application wants to understand you, and the writing skills are how you make yourself understood. I see we have another question. What is some information you recommend to be included in the M&E or reporting steps? The information that should be included in your M&E, and I can go back to this screen. The M&E, what specifically asks for in the YES Alumni Grants is what quantitative and qualitative data can be used to measure how well you're reaching your goal and how you could improve, and how will you collect this data. So that's what information should be in there. So you need to say, I am going to conduct 3 surveys, one before, one in the middle, and one after. The surveys are going to be electronic, or they're going to be in writing, or they're going to be verbal. We are going to ask this many questions to determine the answer to, to determine this impact. That's what needs to be in your M&E plan. And then for your reporting steps, what you should have in there, this is asking you about your project sustainability and visibility. This is one of the places I think you should answer that question. Is just, what are you planning to do? How are you planning to tell people about the results? You can say, I'm going to write a report that I'm going to give to all these local organizations who help me, or it's just going to be internal, but it will inform us in these ways, and we're going to put these things on social media. Whether you think that the project could continue after you have finished your grant, etc. I hope that answers the question. Jenny and Emma, did you have anything to add to that about what should be included in M&E or reporting steps?
Nope, I think you did a great job explaining it.
Okay, good. All right, it is coming right up on 10 o'clock. So 10 o'clock here in DC, which means it's about time for us to finish. I see one more question that I will answer, and then we're going to wrap it up. So the last question is, if a project was not sustainable, does this affect the next time you apply for a grant? The answer is no. If you created a project that you intended to be a one-off thing that was just going to be, this is what I asked, what I said I was going to do, and we did it, and it did this great thing. Maybe you were going to get 100 books into this brand new library, but that was it. That's okay. Just say that very clearly, and then let us know whether you achieved that or not in your M&E and your reporting. If you created a project that you said, I'm going to get 100 books for this library, and then 100 more for another, and then 1,000 more, and then and that didn't end up happening, that's also okay, as long as you have some kind of lessons learned and you can clearly articulate in your next proposal, these were the lessons I learned. It wasn't reasonable to get 1,000 books, that I didn't realize how heavy they were going to be, or how much the shipping costs were, etc. You can just explain yourself clearly in your writing, and that's fine. So it shouldn't affect your future performance, your future funding, as long as you recognize it, you acknowledge it, and you explain it. And that's what good writing is for.
Rachel, we have one more question on Facebook. Are we allowed to collect data from participants during the grant?
Yes, you are. You should check what maybe the local norms are. Maybe talk to someone locally who also does these kinds of projects professionally, and make sure that you wouldn't be breaking any laws or doing anything unethical. For example, in some places, we would think you shouldn't really be interviewing children and including their names in the interviews because of privacy concerns, etc. But you can absolutely be collecting data from participants throughout the grant cycle. You just need to think that through, what that's going to look like for your project, and find something that works locally that you think is ethical, but it also answers the questions that you want to answer about whether the project is working or not. Did I answer that question, you think, Emma? Did I understand it correctly?
Yep, I think that's what they were getting at.
Great. Well, everybody, that is the end of our time together. A last little reminder about the rules. Remember that this is a dynamic process. You can make of it what you want. None of us sitting here are like the answer about how it should be done. It is your grants process. It is your writing. Be yourself. Take your ideas and tell us about them. We're very excited to read about what you come up with. So that's it. Emma, anything we need to do to close things out from our end?
Nope. I just want to thank you, Rachel. This was very informative, and people on Facebook have been loving it. So thank you so much for taking your time to talk with them.
My pleasure. Like I said, I think writing is a really great skill for all of us to have, so that we can take all this stuff that's going around in our heads and like do stuff out in the real world. And you YES alumni are really great at that. So keep up the good work, and good luck on your alumni grants. A reminder that we have recorded this webinar, so you can access it later. We'll have links on the YES YouTube. We will have it up on various YES social media. Feel free to share it out if you think this would be helpful to other people. Put it on your own social media. Let us know if you have questions, and happy writing.